Hello, welcome to the Sexual and Asexual Reproduction slideshow. First standard is SC.7.L.16.1. Understand and explain that every organism requires a set of instructions that specifies its traits, that this hereditary information in the form of DNA contains genes located in the chromosomes of each cell, and that heredity is the passage of these instructions from one generation to another. Our topic is that organisms need instructions to reproduce. We should be able to understand and explain the organisms have heritable traits. Our essential question linked to this standard is, what is the link between heredity and DNA? Our next standard is SC.7.L.16.3. Compare and contrast the general processes of sexual reproduction requiring meiosis and asexual reproduction requiring mitosis. The subject is mitosis and meiosis. We should be able to compare and contrast these reproductive methods. And our essential question for this standard is, how do organisms and cells reproduce? All organisms are made up of cells. This is the smallest biological unit of any organism, and cells contain a nucleus. This is an organelle that has the genetic material in eukaryotic cells. The nucleus contains chromosomes. These molecules carry hereditary information. The chromosomes are made of proteins and DNA, also known as deoxyribonucleic acid. The homologous pairs are in the nucleus. Homologous chromosome pairs are basically pairs of matching chromosomes. So one chromosome would come from the female parent, one would come from the male parent when we're talking about sexual reproduction, and those are all contained within the nucleus. Organisms that reproduce with sexual reproduction through meiosis also have a special pair of chromosomes. These are the X and Y chromosomes. They're also known as the sex chromosomes because they will determine a person's male or female characteristics. So, female organisms have two X chromosomes, while male organisms are going to have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. The Y chromosome contains genetic material that will cause an embryo to develop into a biological male. There are other genes that are on the X and Y chromosomes. One of the most important things that you will inherit from your parents through your X and Y chromosomes will be the genes that contribute to your biological sex. DNA, that's short for deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA has instructions that an organism needs to develop, live, and reproduce. All of that information is in every cell of an organism's body. It's passed down from parents to offspring. Offspring can be the children, the puppies, the young trees or young potato plants. Offspring are the little ones that are produced through reproduction. DNA can be broken into little sections or separated into little sections called genes. This is the basic unit of heredity. It's made up of DNA. Everybody has two copies of genes, one from each parent. In summary, eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. The nucleus is sort of the brain of the cell, and it has the chromosomes, which are the genetic material, which is made up of DNA. And little sections of DNA are called genes. They have the information for one particular trait of you and how you function. In order from largest to smallest, we would see a cell, which contains the nucleus. The chromosomes are in the nucleus. Chromosomes are made of DNA. DNA is made of little sections called genes. And the genes have all the hereditary information. So the information that is passed from the parents to the offspring and is in every eukaryotic cell. We call that genes. There are two methods of reproduction. Humans use both methods of cellular reproduction. The first method we'll talk about is asexual reproduction, that is also known as mitosis. Here we have offspring that arise from just one organism. There's not a mother and a father involved, there's just one cell or one organism that will produce offspring all by itself. Offspring inherit the genes of only one parent, which means all of the offspring are identical. They are uniform in their genetic makeup. They are all the exact same as the parent. Sometimes mutations can occur, which would lead to a small amount of genetic variety. For the most part, cells produced by mitosis are genetically identical to the parent cell. Mitosis is one form of cell division. This is how asexually reproducing organisms are going to have offspring. This is also found in humans. The result of mitosis is two daughter cells that arise from one parent cell. They have the same number and the same kind of chromosomes as the parent cell, and the offspring are what we call diploid. They have a full set of chromosomes. We represent that by saying it has two N chromosomes. That means it's diploid. Cells are going to go through all these different phases before they become clones. And for seventh grade science, we do not need to know all of the different phases. We should understand the genetic material in the parent cell is duplicated. So it basically makes a copy of its genetic material. And then that parent cell will split in two, and you will have two genetically identical daughter cells. When I think about mitosis and a way to remember it, I think of the way the word sounds, mitosis. So I hear three different words there, mitosis. And I think of the phrase, mitosis. Imagine your sister drops something, some glass, and you step on the glass and you cut your toe. You may exclaim, mitosis. And how is your toe going to be repaired from the damage? Through mitosis. So that is just one way that I remember mitosis. Mitosis has some advantages. One advantage is that mitosis is great for organisms that are not mobile and cannot look for a mate. So mushrooms, they just sit there. They can't go look for mates. Strawberry plants, potato plants, they can also reproduce asexually, and it's great. They just throw out, strawberries have what are called runners, and if you have one potato and you leave it in the ground, the next year you'll get a new potato plant. They just clone themselves. So asexual reproduction is great if the organism cannot go find a mate. Also, if you want a lot of offspring, really quickly, without expending a lot of energy, you want mitosis to occur. Mitosis is great for the growth and repair of the human body. You don't your cells don't have to go find another cell to exchange genetic information with. When you're injured, your skin cells have the genetic information that tells them, okay, we need to reproduce, we need to cover over this area that has been injured, and that happens pretty quickly. Now, some organisms that use mitosis are going to reproduce using spores. A spore is a reproductive cell that does not need another cell to interact with in order to make a new organism. Spores reproduce just by themselves. They find a suitable place after they're expelled from their host organism, and then they just start growing. There's no combination of different organisms cells as there is in meiosis. just the spores produce new organisms. There are also disadvantages to asexual reproduction. Remember, all of the offspring of asexual reproduction through mitosis are going to be genetically identical to the parent cell. There's very little genetic variation. What might occur is that there is a mutation in the genetic information that could lead to some diversity, but 99% of the offspring are genetically identical. So, as a result, they all share the same weaknesses. Antibiotics work so well because the bacteria, they're clones of each other. So if penicillin kills one of the bacteria in your body, the penicillin will kill all of the bacteria in your body unless there was a mutation in some of those bacteria. But for the most part, cells and organisms produced with mitosis, they all have the same weaknesses. To take this a little further, if the environment changes, there will not be a lot of time to adapt. Most of the organisms will die. They're all clones. They all have the same weakness. If something comes along and can kill one of the cells, it can kill all of the cells. So these are disadvantages of asexual reproduction through mitosis. The other form of cellular reproduction is sexual reproduction through meiosis. This type of reproduction is going to have offspring that arise from two different parent cells. Those parent cells are going to be the product of meiosis. So one parent, the male parent, will produce uh, the gamete that is called sperm that is in the testes. The other parent will produce the female gamete, which is called an ovum. Oftentimes we call it an egg that is produced in the ovaries. Gamete is another word for the sex cell. The sex cells are the sperm and the egg. Another name for gametes are germ cells. So you might hear any of these terminologies. You may read any of these terms as you're doing your work. Gametes are also known as sex cells, are also known as germ cells. They are the sperm in a male and the egg in a female. Meiosis occurs, and at the end of meiosis, you will end up with four gametes, four daughter cells that we call gametes. And there are many phases that the cells have to go through in order to go from one parent cell to four daughter cells known as gametes. This is required to produce the egg and the sperm for sexual reproduction, and the gametes are what we call haploid. We can write an N to represent how many chromosomes there are because the gametes have half the chromosomes of the parent cell and half the chromosomes that are required for the new organism to occur. So, for instance, in human beings, one egg cell has 23 chromosomes, one sperm cell has 23 chromosomes, and when they combine, you get the resulting young human embryo is going to have 46 chromosomes. So, again, gametes, also known as germ cells, also known as the sperm and egg, are haploid. They have half of the genetics of the parent cell. When you look at the word haploid, it starts with the HA. The word half starts with the HA. Haploid cells have half of the genetic material of the organism that will arise from that gamete. Half the genetic information of the parent cell. Two cell divisions are going to occur in order to have gametes produced from meiosis. We do not need to know every single phase of the cell cycle that results in gametes. One part of the phases that I will emphasize, we don't need to know everything, but one important thing that occurs is crossing over. We talked about homologous chromosomes, which are the pairs of chromosomes, one from your female parent, one from your male parent. Well, in meiosis 1, those homologous pairs are sitting beside each other. And what sometimes happens is these are called chromatids. Each little stripe here is called a chromatid. Sometimes these chromatids will cross over. It's almost like they hold hands and they exchange some genetic material. So you see the homologous pairs, you have two blue, two purple, crossing over occurs, and the result in the gametes is going to be the blue chromosomes with a little bit of purple and a purple chromosome with a little bit of blue. So there's this exchange of genetic information. This leads to even more genetic diversity. The key point from this is crossing over helps to mix up the genetics and it increases the genetic diversity. It increases the genetic variation. It increases the different types of genetics that an organism has. That is the key takeaway from learning about crossing over during meiosis. There are some advantages to sexual reproduction through meiosis. Number one, there's a lot of genetic variation in the new generations, which is fundamental for environmental adaptation. The reason we have so many species of animals and plants in the world is because of this adaptation. There are changes that occur in the genetics slowly over time, and that can lead to different organisms being better equipped and adapted to live in different environments. Organisms that are reproducing through meiosis, they also tend to be more protected. So, an illness might not wipe out every single organism of a particular species because of the genetic variation. Some organisms will be stronger against a change in the environment, like let's say all of a sudden there's a cold snap. All of the bacteria in that environment might die because they have the same genetic profile. But in that same environment, you may have some pigs or deer or polar bears or whatever animal. Those animals have a lot more genetic diversity. While some of the animals may die when it gets extremely cold, extremely fast, other animals, they have some genetic diversity. So maybe they are just better equipped to deal with the cold. Maybe they naturally hold more insulation on their body. Maybe they naturally have thicker fur and they will survive, where the other organisms in the species that don't have those same genetic variations could pass away. Over time, bad genes can be removed from the population. If organisms have an unfavorable characteristic that does not allow them to hunt, find mates, or live as long as other organisms, then those genes that stop an animal from being able to hunt and find a mate, eventually they fall out of the gene pool because the animal doesn't either live long enough to reproduce or it's unsuccessful when it tries to reproduce. So imagine you have a population of gazelle, right? Gazelle live out in Africa, the lions hunt them, the leopards hunt them. Imagine you have one group of gazelles and some of those gazelles have longer legs and stronger muscles. The longer legs and stronger muscles will help them run and outpace the predators, like the leopards and the lions that will try to eat them. Eventually, the gazelles with shorter legs and weaker muscles will be eaten by the lions and the leopards, and those organisms that had less desirable traits are now out of the breeding population. Also, new species can occur. Whenever you have genetic variation, you might see some new, exciting, interesting species that can occur. There are disadvantages of sexual reproduction through meiosis, though. One significant thing that can hold organisms back from reproducing, they have to find a mate. If there's just a bunch of males in a population and there's very few females, one thing that can happen is fighting. The males have a limited resource, which would be females that they want to mate with. So the males are likely going to end up fighting more, which will reduce the population because the injuries could lead to death. So finding a mate is an issue. One, you have to compete for mates. Two, it takes energy to go find those mates. So the organism has to be well equipped to feed itself and survive long enough to find another organism to mate with. It takes a lot longer to reproduce. Even organisms with very short gestation periods that only have to hold the eggs or the offspring inside their bodies to produce, I'm sorry, to develop for just a short period of time, it's still really long when you compare it to how fast something like a bacteria can reproduce. So it just takes longer for animals and organisms that go through meiosis. It just takes them longer to reproduce. Sometimes good genes don't get passed down. In mitosis, every single gene gets passed down, the good and the bad. In meiosis, the genes that get passed down are random. Sometimes the good genes end up being passed on, and sometimes undesirable genes end up being passed on. There are organisms born with different sort of illnesses or conditions or disorders all the time. So bad genes can get passed on just like good genes can get passed on. Last but not least, there's a lot less offspring. It just takes a long time to produce the offspring. And then if the animals are caring or if the organism cares for its offspring, that takes time and energy. So you get a lot less offspring through meiosis. This slide here shows a comparison between meiosis and mitosis. So in mitosis, we have parent cells that start with two N chromosomes. They are diploid. In meiosis, we start also with two N chromosomes in the parent. In the daughter cells for mitosis, we have two N chromosomes, so the daughters are diploid. But in meiosis, here's a key difference. We have N chromosomes. The daughter cells of meiosis are haploid. Now let's stop for a second and talk about diploid, haploid, 2N, and 4N. N represents the number of chromosomes that come from one parent. 2N represents the number of chromosomes that the organism ends up with from both parents. We use N as a variable. We use N as a variable. We say 2N and N because this can apply to any organism. Humans, for example, have a diploid number of 46. That would be 2N. And a haploid number of 23. That would be N. Meanwhile, you have a fruit fly. Its diploid number is 8. That's 2N. And its haploid number is 4. That's N. So any organism you're talking about, you can substitute the correct numbers for N and 2N. That's why we use this notation with these variables. The parent cell of mitosis will be a somatic or body cell. Somatic cells are body cells. A somatic cell is any cell that is not a gamete. Those are somatic cells. And in meiosis, the parent cell is a gamete. There's only one division in mitosis, but there are two divisions in meiosis. And remember, part of that division does include this thing called crossing over, where the chromosomes actually exchange information with each other to create more diversity. In mitosis, you just get two daughter cells, two diploid daughter cells. In meiosis, you get 4 haploid daughter cells. The purpose of mitosis, growth and repair. In humans specifically, it's growth and repair. Remember, there are other organisms that just reproduce using mitosis, so they just make offspring. In humans, we use mitosis for growth and repair. And meiosis in humans and other asexually producing creatures would be the production of gametes, also known as germ cells, also known as sperm in males and eggs in females. All right, so let's do some critical thinking. Think about a population of organisms that reproduces asexually. Which would be more difficult for the population to survive? A disease that destroys half its population, or a disease that targets any organism in the population with similar traits? And why do you think this is? Pause the video, stop and think about it, and then come back and we will discuss the answer. Are you ready? Did you think about it? Okay, well, here's my thinking. If a disease destroys half the population of an asexually producing organism, then that's still half the population available to undergo mitosis and repopulate. If a disease targets any organism in the population that has similar traits, well, that would be more devastating. Why? Because all of the offspring of mitosis are genetically identical. So whatever the trait is, they all share it. The disease will wipe out the entire population. All right, we got some more critical thinking to do. Work backwards. If you find an offspring that is not genetically identical to its parent organism, what type of reproduction created it? Why? Think about it, and then we will circle back for the answer. Pause the video, think about it, and then start the video again. All right, did you think about it? We have offspring. It is not genetically identical to the parent organism. What type of reproduction created it? That must be sexual reproduction through meiosis. Why? Well, meiosis creates the gametes, also known as germ cells. The gametes are all genetically different. When they combine, you get a whole new unique organism. Meanwhile, with mitosis, you have one parent cell, it copies its DNA, it splits into 2 identical daughter cells. And one last thinking question for us. Now think about a population of organisms that reproduces sexually. Which would be more difficult for that population to survive? A disease that destroys half its population, or a disease that targets any organism in the population with similar traits? What do you think and why? Pause the video, and then we'll come back with an answer. All right, what were you thinking? I'll tell you what I was thinking. We have lots of genetic diversity when it comes to sexually reproducing organisms. My thought is 50% of the population is 50%, no discrimination. Just you started with 100, now you only have 50. So I wonder if the disease only targets organisms with a similar trait. I I might go out on a limb and say less than 50% of the organisms are going to have this exact same trait. So I think it might be more difficult for the population to survive losing half of its members. I think that if the disease targeted organisms that have a similar trait, there's probably just a lower chance, like less than 50% of the organisms are going to have this exact same trait that the disease will wipe out. So that's where I'm thinking with that. There are so many other variables that one could throw in here. We don't know the exact genetics, we don't know the exact disease, etc., etc. This is this is just my thought. Less than 50% of the population could have that particular trait. So it would be less devastating to the population. Thank you for joining me for these video notes. I hope that you feel edified. I hope that you feel like you understand this material. If not, please feel free to send an email and I will try my best to answer your questions. Thank you very much.